The night air in Washington carried a quiet tension, but inside the brightly lit CNN studio, the atmosphere was electric. A long stage stretched across the room, draped in deep blues and reds, with the American flag projected behind the podiums. Cameras whirred, lights burned hot, and hundreds of eyes were fixed on the two figures at the center. On the left stood Chelsea Clinton, her presence polished and deliberate. Dressed in a crisp navy suit, she carried the unmistakable aura of the Clinton legacy, a voice tied to democratic ideals of progressivism, healthcare access, and climate urgency. She adjusted her notes with steady hands, her face framed by the weight of expectation. To her supporters, she was the modern torchbearer of liberal America, ready to challenge the conservative order. On the right sat Governor Greg Abbott of Texas, calm in his wheelchair, his expression composed and unshakable. In a tailored gray suit, his presence radiated steadiness, rooted in the grit of Texas leadership. He was known for his relentless defense of state sovereignty, border control, and the oil and gas backbone of his state. Abbott supporters saw him as the bulwark against Washington overreach, a leader who could stand toe-to-toe with any voice from the Democratic establishment. The audience hushed as Anderson Cooper stepped forward, microphone in hand. His words carried the gravity of the night. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we witness a debate that pits two powerful visions against each other. On one side, Chelsea Clinton, representing a new generation of progressive ideals. On the other, Governor Greg Abbott, standing firm in the Texas tradition of independence and strength. This isn't just policy. This is a clash of futures. The crowd erupted in applause, then fell silent as the first question cut through the air. Governor Abbott, Ms. Clinton, America faces crises of both economy and culture. Jobs, energy, immigration, climate, all divide this nation. Tell us, whose vision can unite America? Chelsea leaned forward first, her voice sharp, her conviction rising. Governor Abbott represents the politics of resistance. He stands in the way of healthcare reform, of renewable energy, of progress itself. America doesn't need barricades. It needs bridges. And with all respect to Texas, we cannot build a future by clinging to the past. The crowd clapped loudly, a wave of support washing through the room. Then Abbott adjusted his microphone, his tone low but resolute. Chelsea Clinton talks about bridges. But bridges built on weak foundations collapse. What she calls the past, I call survival. In Texas, we protect our workers, our families, and our freedoms. And we will not trade real strength for promises written in speeches. The clash had begun, the Clinton legacy versus Texas steel. The air thickened with anticipation, the debate hall vibrated with energy after the opening exchange. Chelsea Clinton leaned forward, sensing the momentum from the audience's applause. Her tone sharpened, confidence lacing every word. Governor Abbott, you speak of survival as though it's enough. But survival isn't progress. Americans aren't asking for the bare minimum, they're asking for a future. We can't solve climate change with oil rigs. We can't rebuild trust with border walls. And we certainly can't heal a divided nation by refusing to compromise. My father taught me that leadership means building coalitions. My mother taught me that leadership means fighting for those without a voice. What has Texas leadership taught you? The room buzzed with murmurs, some clapping in support, others bristling at the sting in her words. Abbott's expression didn't shift. His calm was unshaken, almost unnerving. He let the applause fade before answering, his voice low and measured. Chelsea, Texas leadership has taught me something Washington politicians never seem to learn: real people don't live in theories. They live in communities where jobs put food on the table. They live in towns where border security isn't an abstract talking point but a daily necessity. They live in homes where affordable, reliable energy keeps the lights on. You may inherit a legacy of speeches, I inherit the responsibility of action. That's the difference. The crowd erupted, half in cheers, half in gasps. The moderator glanced nervously at the cameras, knowing social media was already ablaze. Chelsea's jaw tightened, but she pushed back. Action without vision is just motion, Governor. And motion doesn't change the course of history. America deserves better than standing still while the world moves forward. Abbott leaned slightly closer to the mic, a faint glint in his eyes. And vision without grounding is fantasy, Chelsea. Texans don't gamble on fantasies. We build futures that last. The words landed like a thunderclap. The contrast was crystal clear, Clinton's passion against Abbott's unshakable resolve. The studio fell into a tense silence, the air thick with the weight of the clash. The moderator sensed the clash intensifying and leaned in quickly, trying to channel the fire into the next round. Let's move to legacy. Ms. Clinton, Governor Abbott, both of you stand on traditions that define very different parts of America. One comes from a family name deeply tied to Washington, the other from the rugged independence of Texas. How do those legacies shape your leadership? The camera turned to Chelsea first. She straightened, her tone rising with practiced clarity. My family taught me that leadership means responsibility to lift people up, to expand opportunity, and to never stop pushing for progress. Yes, my name carries history, but that history is about fighting for healthcare reform, for education, for women's rights. And Governor Abbott, while you talk about grit, you often confuse obstruction with strength. Standing in the way of change is not leadership. It's fear disguised as principle. The audience gasped, some applauding fiercely while others frowned. The sting in her words was undeniable. Abbott didn't flinch. He sat calmly, waited for the clapping to fade, and then leaned closer to his microphone. His voice was steady, with the kind of weight that seemed to silence the room by itself. Chelsea, legacy is earned in deeds, not inherited in names. You talk about responsibility, well, Texans live it every day. They build businesses from the ground up, they protect their borders when Washington fails, and they keep communities alive through faith, family, and work. That's our legacy. You say I confuse obstruction with strength. No. I know the difference. Obstruction is saying no just to stall. Strength is saying no when a bad idea threatens the people you serve. And in Texas, we don't apologize for strength. The studio shook with applause, louder than before, filling the air with a force that even Chelsea's supporters couldn't ignore. Chelsea's smile tightened. She leaned forward again, voice sharp, strength without compassion, Governor, is just cruelty. Abbott's eyes narrowed slightly, the faintest smile tugging at his lips. And compassion without strength, Chelsea, is just weakness. The tension in the room spiked, the audience caught between two worlds, one of inherited vision, one of earned grit. Anderson Cooper quickly redirected, sensing the room was near boiling point. Let's shift to immigration, one of the most divisive issues facing our country. Ms. Clinton, Governor Abbott, your views couldn't be further apart. How would each of you handle America's southern border? Chelsea jumped in first, her tone forceful, her words tumbling out with practiced rhythm. Governor Abbott treats the border like a war zone. He sends troops, builds razor wire, and fosters fear. But America is not built on fear, it's built on hope. We need comprehensive reform, a pathway to citizenship, and compassion for families fleeing violence. Militarizing the border doesn't solve the problem. It just creates more suffering. My vision is about humanity and unity, not division. The crowd cheered, especially younger voices in the audience. Cameras panned across nodding supporters holding signs of solidarity. Abbott let the cheers settle before moving his microphone closer. His calm voice carried across the room with steady authority. Chelsea, that's a fine speech for Washington cocktail parties. But let me tell you what Texans see every day. Ranchers find fences cut and land trampled. Families watch strangers cross through their backyards at midnight. Law enforcement faces cartels smuggling drugs and human lives. You call my response militarization, I call it protection. Texans don't have the luxury of waiting for Washington to dream up pathways. We live on the front line, and we act. The studio rippled with applause, louder and sharper than before. Some audience members stood, clapping hard, while others shook their heads in disapproval. Chelsea's face tightened, her voice cutting back swiftly. Governor, protection without reform is just endless crisis. You cannot arrest your way out of a humanitarian issue. America needs solutions that honor our values. Abbott's reply was cold steel, and values mean nothing if you can't protect your people first. Texans will always put safety before slogans. The words hung in the air like a hammer blow, splitting the audience down the middle. The clash of humanity versus security had never felt sharper. The moderator let the immigration clash settle for a beat before turning the conversation. Let's talk economy. Inflation, energy, and jobs, the bread and butter issues that touch every American home. Governor Abbott, Ms. Clinton, your economic philosophies are miles apart. What would your plan deliver to the American people? Chelsea clasped her hands together, her voice steady but passionate. Governor Abbott's Texas model relies on oil, gas, and tax cuts for the wealthy. That doesn't build sustainable growth. My vision is about investing in clean energy, expanding healthcare access, and ensuring that working families, not just corporations, thrive. We can't keep propping up industries that pollute our planet while families struggle with prescription drug prices and student debt. The future economy must be green, fair, and inclusive. The younger audience members erupted into applause, some standing and cheering. Chelsea's words echoed like a rallying cry for a new era. Abbott leaned slightly forward, his expression unmoved. His tone cut through the cheers with iron calm. Chelsea, speeches about fairness sound nice, but Texans don't feed their families on speeches. You want to dismantle oil and gas? That's 400,000 jobs gone, families, mortgages, livelihoods wiped out. You talk about clean energy as if it's ready to replace what keeps this country running, but even in Texas, where we lead in wind power, renewables aren't strong enough to power a single hospital without natural gas backing it up. You're selling promises, while Texans are delivering results. The crowd exploded with applause, especially from older members and those wary of radical economic change. Chelsea quickly countered, her tone sharp as a blade. Results that poison the air, drive inequality, and trap us in the past. Governor, you defend an economy of the few, while I fight for an economy for the many. Abbott's reply was calm, but laced with fire. And in Texas, the many don't eat if you shut down the few. That's the truth Washington doesn't want to hear. The room erupted again, two Americas clashing in one studio. One demanded transformation, the other demanded stability. The moderator let the roar of economic arguments fade before turning to a subject guaranteed to ignite sparks. Governor Abbott, Ms. Clinton, America is also divided on cultural issues. From education to identity, from faith to freedom of speech, these debates cut deep. How should leaders approach the cultural divide? Chelsea Clinton inhaled slowly, then leaned forward, her tone deliberate but emotional. Governor Abbott represents a politics that divides families, classrooms, and communities. When leaders ban books, restrict reproductive rights, or dismiss systemic racism as fiction, they aren't protecting freedom, they're strangling it. Leadership should mean opening doors, not closing them. In a diverse country like ours, unity doesn't come from silencing voices. It comes from listening to them. The audience burst into applause, particularly younger and more progressive attendees. Chelsea's words carried the weight of liberal values, invoking her family's history of speaking to civil rights and equality. Abbott remained unmoved. He leaned in, his calm voice like steel wrapped in velvet. Chelsea, what you call silencing, Texans call protecting children, protecting families, protecting values. Books that sexualize children? They don't belong in schools. Policies that treat gender as a political experiment? They don't belong in classrooms. You talk about reproductive rights, but you ignore the unborn child's right to live. You may call it progress, but in Texas, we call it responsibility. The audience split in two, loud applause from Abbott's supporters, gasps and boos from Clinton's. The energy was raw, a reflection of America's cultural battlefield. Chelsea quickly countered, her voice rising with emotion. Governor, hiding from hard truths doesn't protect children. It leaves them ignorant and afraid. Censoring voices, limiting women's choices, and dismissing identity isn't responsibility, it's control. And America deserves better than leaders who trade compassion for fear. Abbott's eyes narrowed slightly, his reply cutting through the tension. And America deserves better than leaders who mistake chaos for compassion. Texas stands for order, family, and faith. That's not fear, Chelsea. That's strength. The clash was seismic, one America demanding freedom through inclusivity, the other demanding stability through tradition. The moderator shifted nervously in his chair. The cultural battle had split the room in half, but the real storm was still building. He hesitated, then asked. Governor Abbott, Ms. Clinton, critics say your differences are not just policy, but personal. Do you believe the other represents a danger to America's future? The question hung like a thundercloud. Chelsea didn't flinch. She leaned forward, her voice sharp and direct. Governor Abbott represents a vision of America stuck in the past. He may call it tradition, but what it really means is limiting opportunity, blocking progress, and keeping people in fear. Leadership isn't about how loud you can say no, it's about finding a way to say yes. If Governor Abbott's approach defines America's future, then we're condemning ourselves to division, stagnation, and decline. The crowd erupted in applause, her supporters chanting, "Yes we can." The Clinton legacy flared brightly in her defiance. Abbott waited. The clapping rolled through the studio, cameras flashing across the crowd. Only when the noise began to ebb did he move, his voice calm but carrying the force of a hammer. Chelsea Clinton says I live in the past. But I'll tell you what's worse than being stuck in the past, it's being blinded by a fantasy future that doesn't exist. I don't govern based on what Washington elites dream up in think tanks. I govern based on what Texans live every day. Real people, real problems, real solutions. And Chelsea, if standing up for them makes me a danger to your vision, then so be it. Because I'd rather be a danger to Washington than a failure to Texas. The studio shook with cheers, Abbott's supporters roaring his name. Chelsea's jaw tightened. Her retort came quickly, almost too sharp. Governor, no one elected you to define America's future. You represent Texas, but you don't represent the nation. Abbott's reply was swift, his tone like iron. Chelsea, the nation looks to Texas when Washington fails. That's why we lead. And that's why your words sound empty, because America knows where strength lives. The audience split again, cheers colliding with boos. The clash was no longer just ideological. It was personal. The tension in the studio was almost unbearable. The audience leaned forward, sensing they were witnessing more than just a policy debate. This had turned into a clash of identities, of two Americas staring each other down. Anderson Cooper raised his hand, his voice measured but tight. Let's address leadership in crisis. Governor Abbott, Ms. Clinton, Americans are tired of partisan bickering. They want to know who can lead in moments of real danger. Whether it's a hurricane in Texas, a pandemic, or foreign conflict, what makes you the leader this nation needs? Chelsea Clinton seized the moment. Her voice carried a sharp rhythm, her delivery polished with the cadence of someone who had lived politics since childhood. When crisis strikes, you don't retreat behind slogans. You don't pit neighbor against neighbor. Leadership is about empathy, trust, and coordination. During COVID, Governor Abbott chose politics over science. He kept businesses open, yes, but he put lives at risk. That's not leadership, that's recklessness. America deserves leaders who rise above ideology, not sink into it. The audience clapped fiercely, her supporters chanting her name. Abbott let the chants roll over him like a tide. His face was calm, but his voice hardened with an edge that demanded attention. Chelsea Clinton talks about science. Let me talk about reality. During COVID, Washington's mandates destroyed livelihoods. Small businesses closed forever. Families lost everything, not because of the virus alone, but because of politicians who thought they knew better than the people. In Texas, we trusted our citizens to make choices for themselves. We protected lives and livelihoods. That's not recklessness. That's leadership that respects freedom. The applause roared, Abbott supporters on their feet. The clash had boiled down to its sharpest contrast yet, freedom versus control, grit versus legacy. Chelsea leaned closer, her tone biting. Freedom without responsibility, Governor, isn't leadership. It's chaos. Abbott's reply was instant, his words like steel. And responsibility without freedom, Chelsea, isn't leadership. It's tyranny. The studio gasped. The moment was electric, history in the making. The studio lights seemed hotter now, the audience restless, leaning on the edge of their seats as the debate charged toward its climax. The moderator's voice was steady, but even he couldn't disguise the intensity in the room. Governor Abbott, Ms. Clinton, one final question before closing statements. If you had to define the other in one word, what would it be? The audience gasped, this wasn't policy. This was personal. Chelsea Clinton didn't hesitate. She leaned into her microphone, her voice crisp. Obstruction. Governor Abbott is not a builder. He is an obstacle. To healthcare reform, to climate solutions, to justice. An obstacle to progress, dressed up as strength. Her supporters erupted in applause, the word obstruction echoing like a verdict. Abbott's eyes stayed locked on her, his calm unmoved. He let the noise die down before answering, his tone sharp but steady. Legacy. Not earned, inherited. Chelsea Clinton's politics are built on a last name, not on the grit of real leadership. Texans don't inherit their legacy, they build it, brick by brick, challenge by challenge. That's the difference between us. The crowd thundered, some rising to their feet, chants of Abbott. Abbott, rolling through the hall. Chelsea tried to interject, her voice cutting in. Governor, my legacy is about lifting people up. Abbott's interruption was swift, his words slicing through. Then start by standing on your own, not on your parents' shoulders. The audience gasped, then erupted into deafening applause, the line already destined to go viral. Hashtags lit up across Twitter within seconds. Hashtag Abbott Strikes Back and hashtag Clinton Legacy began trending, the battle spreading beyond the studio walls. The air was electric, the debate had moved past policy into the raw territory of identity, vision, and pride. Both sides had landed blows, but Abbott's last words lingered like a strike that Chelsea hadn't fully deflected. The stage was set for closing remarks, the moment each would try to seize the narrative for good. The studio was electric, the air thick with anticipation as the moderator raised his voice one last time. Governor Abbott, Ms. Clinton, we've reached the end of tonight's debate. You each have one final chance to speak directly to the American people. Governor Abbott, you first. Abbott straightened in his chair, folding his hands neatly before leaning toward the microphone. His tone was calm, deliberate, but carried the strength of steel. Folks, tonight you heard two visions of America. One built on speeches, one built on sweat. Chelsea Clinton talks about progress, but progress without roots blows away in the first storm. In Texas, we build on foundations, family, faith, freedom. That's how we weather storms. That's how we lead. Washington wants you to believe solutions come from politics. Texans know solutions come from people. And as long as I'm in this fight, I'll never let empty promises take the place of real results. The crowd erupted, many standing, chants of Abbott. Abbott, echoing off the walls. The moderator turned to Chelsea. She leaned forward, her eyes locked on Abbott before turning to the audience. Her voice was firm, impassioned, a rallying cry. Governor Abbott may talk about roots, but roots alone don't grow a future. America deserves leaders who don't just preserve the past but build a tomorrow worth living in. This isn't about names or legacies. It's about courage, courage to face the climate crisis, courage to expand healthcare, courage to unite instead of divide. If we cling to yesterday, we lose tomorrow. I refuse to let that happen. And I believe Americans won't either. Her supporters roared, signs waving, chants of Chelsea. Chelsea, rising to meet Abbott's chorus. The camera zoomed out as the two rivals exchanged one final stare, her fire against his iron, passion against resolve. The stage lights dimmed slightly, the moderator's closing words drowned by the roar of a divided audience. Outside the studio, hashtags exploded across social media. Hashtag Abbott vs. Clinton, hashtag Strength vs. Vision, and hashtag Future of America trended within minutes. The debate hadn't ended, it had only just begun in the hearts and minds of millions watching.